Hi, I'm Effie. This is What Effie Reads, and today we're going to be doing a whistle-stop wrap-up of the books that I read in the month of October. Why whistle-stop? Well, one, I've got a busy day today, and this is the only time that I had to film for the next wee while, so I have to do it today. And two, I managed to read 28 books in the month of October. In fairness, a lot of them were under 100 pages. So yeah, not much time, too many books to talk about. So we're going to go quickly, but if you want more information on any of the books, and I will also say all of the books will be listed in the description, let me know in the comments. So let's jump straight in. I will be referring to my story graph so that I can remember what I read. First up, we have Veils and Vampires and Violins and Vampires by CB. I've said those the wrong way round, but you know what I mean. They are fantasy romance. They're quite short and sweet. They follow two vampires that are over 1,000 years old, but one of the vampires doesn't actually know that she is a vampire, and there's also a kind of like mafia element to it. Personally, I didn't think that the mafia element was very strong, but I enjoyed the vampire lore and just generally the world that CB's created, and I'm looking forward to exploring more with this story. It feels like the characters that you are following in these two books, their character arc is a kind of stopping off point, so I'm expecting that the next books in the series might follow some different characters, but I'm not really sure because there's like brewing conflicts in the background that very much we could be seeing these same characters explore going forward. The next 6 books are the Creature Feature collection from Amazon. So that's The Pram by Joe Hill, Ankle Snatcher by Grady Hendrix, It Waits in the Wood by Josh Malerman, In Bloom by Paul Tremblay, Best of Luck by Jason Mott, and Big Bad by Chandler Baker. I have mixed results when I read Amazon short story collections. I think this one was probably like relatively decent. I felt like the stories got better as you went through the series. So if you started at 1 with The Pram by Joe Hill, I thought that was the weakest. And then I thought Big Bad by Chandler Baker was the best story in this collection. They gave me most of what I was looking for, but I think I was looking for more emphasis on the creatures, especially considering this series is called Creature Feature, and it was a bit more about like the human element of it, which isn't really what I signed up for. Next up, I read Blood is Another Word for Hunger by Rivers Solomon. This is another like really short story. I can't remember too much about it, but I think that's because it felt very fever dream. I think it was dealing with gods and vengeance, and like I had a good time when I was reading it, but right now I can't really remember much about it other than it was a vibe. Possessed by the Devil by Nicola Rose. I picked this up because I wanted something a bit Weird and Wonderful romantasy adjacent, and essentially this follows a demon hunter who the devil comes calling and basically is like, oh, by the way, you've been promised to me, so you're gonna come to hell with me and I'm gonna make you my queen. I did want a bit more of like the devil being bad. Like, don't get me wrong, he isn't a good guy, he is the devil, but he also was kind of like soft, which was a shame, but also for people that enjoy Akatar, I was getting kind of Rhysand vibes from him. The next book that I read was Filthy Rich Vampire by Geneva. This follows a vampire during social season and a human that the vampire is immediately drawn to and wants to abandon social season just to hang out with this human. They have a fake dating arrangement, but they both very much have feelings for one another from the start. I do go a bit more detailed into this book in my video about the way that virginity is portrayed in books, which I think was the last video up on my channel, possibly the video before. I will link it in the description if I remember. But overall, I enjoyed it, but I had like one glaring issue with it. And then we are getting into me reading the books on my self-destruct list, like finally getting around to reading them. So first up, we've got Letters to the Lost by Brigid Kemmerer. I was really excited to get stuck into it. It's one of my best friend's all-time favourite books. It hits really hard and it is quite a difficult one because you are sitting with the grief for a long time. But also I thought it was so beautifully written, and the way that initially the grief is so intense and strong, and then it's like waves where you'll have moments where the grief isn't so present, and then one little thing will trigger it and it becomes so incredibly intense again. And it just filled me with so much joy. Joy's a bad word to use about a book about grief. It was a really good book and it makes me want to read more Brigid Kemmerer, particularly her contemporary works, because this hits so hard for me. Then we have Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. I feel super late to the party, having not read this before. I thought it was okay, like it didn't have as many twists and turns as I expected it to have, but it kept me listening because I listened to the audiobook of this. It kept me listening from start to finish, and I did enjoy the way that you were getting past timeline interspersed with present timeline, and the way that it handled the ending so that you felt like you were building up to this point and then it kind of skipped over it so you didn't get the reveal until right at the end. I did think that it needed possibly just another couple of pages right at the end just to make things a little bit clearer and get a bit more insight into what other characters in the story might have been thinking. But overall, it was surprisingly solid. I was worried going into it because it is an older thriller that it wouldn't stand up, but it did a good job. The next group of books, and excuse me as I'm going to run down my list, I'm going to group all together because you'll be able to see a theme pretty quickly. We've got Unhinged by Vera Valentine, Stuffed by Sylvia Morrow, Sap and Spile by Vera Valentine, Squeak by Vera Valentine, Claimed by a Coffee Mug by Shayla Storm, Beached and Breached by Vera Valentine, Squeal by Vera Valentine. So, take your guesses on what the theme of those are, and I won't say too much about them because I am going to have a dedicated video, actually 2 dedicated videos about these books. One kind of just talking about them in general, and one where I spill all the tea about what goes on in these books for people that are curious about the hype but don't want to read them for themselves for whatever reason. So all I will say is that I was really pleasantly surprised. Like, they hit a lot harder than I was expecting, and I just overall had a really good time with them, and I kind of want more books in the same vein. The next book is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and this is not showing up very well with my lighting. I'm just gonna wiggle it because it shines. So this was another one that I read as an audiobook, and I had not read this before, and it was fairly decent, although I do think it was significantly longer than it needed to be. I felt like the first half of the book was completely unnecessary, And then in the second half of the book, there was a lot of whiplash where it's like, we hate him, we don't hate him. And I felt that the characters needed to be developed further during that. I also felt like the supernatural creatures weren't explained clearly enough, so I'm still a little bit confused about them. The other small issue I had with this book was the way that it used words that already have a meaning to mean something else. So one of the creatures are called Atlanteans, and to my mind, I would expect them to be like mer creatures or selkies, kelpies, anything like that, but they're not, and that just confused my brain. Also, the fact that it takes place in a place called Macedonia, and it's spelled differently, but as I was listening to it, all I could think was, that's a real place. I am baffled. It just like really weird things that annoyed me and very like hyper specific to my personal taste. But I will be continuing the series because I kind of want to know what happens and want to know all the hype. And most of the audiobooks are on script, so why not? But also kind of a little teaser for content to come. I'm hoping to do the fantasy category of the Goodreads Choice Awards this year, and I think there's a fair chance that at least one of the From Blood and Ash books will turn up this year. I know that we can't have multiple books from the same series, but I know the prequel series, there's also been a book released in that within the qualifying period, so technically we could have 2 Armentrout books, so I may end up getting to the From Blood and Ash books even quicker than I am anticipating, but I guess we'll see. The next book that I read was House of Hollow by Krystal Sutherland. I also read the bonus short story, The Girl in the Storm, which is a 10-page short story from Gray's perspective. As I think I've said in a recent video, or maybe the video's not coming up yet, I can't remember, I didn't think I was going to enjoy this book because I tried the first couple of chapters and it wasn't really intriguing me. I didn't like that it was set in England, but then once I got into this book, I was absolutely hooked. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was incredibly vicious, and that was just what I was looking for. And I think that Krystal Sutherland has a really good way of writing. I do think there were a couple of occasions where it was clear that Krystal Sutherland is not from England. Like, it was just the odd anomaly here and there, whereas like, yeah, that you can tell, but I think it's a case of you probably wouldn't pick up on them most of the time. And overall, it was a really good book. I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. Unfortunately, this one just didn't hit for me at all. I think it missed the opportunity to have a nuanced conversation about queer identity and faith. I also just found it really difficult to be in Chloe's head for the whole of the book. Even though it's in third person, it very much feels like you are in Chloe's head, and she is not a nice person to be in her head for a whole book. So yeah, and unfortunately this is the second time that a Casey McQuiston book hasn't really hit for me, so I think I'm gonna try the next book that they bring out, but if that one doesn't hit, then I think unfortunately that's going to be the last time I read a McQuiston. The Stars Are Dying by Chloe C. Penaranda. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. I picked this up basically because I saw that it's just been picked up by a traditional publisher, and I'd been humming and hawing about it since I saw it on TikTok, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna pick it up and see if I do like it before it gets traditionally published, partially because this edition's absolutely gorgeous. So really pretty dust jacket, but then it looks like that under the dust jacket. And also it's got a digital signature and beautiful artwork of the characters. So I'm not familiar with the Greek mythology that this is based on, but this is based on the Australian mythology, and I really enjoyed it. This has been billed as the villain gets the girl, and very much it does feel like genuinely a villain, which is something that I was missing from Possessed by the Devil. So it was really fun to see this character who is quite morally corrupt ending up with the girl, potentially. This is the first book in the trilogy, and as I say, I'm not familiar with the mythos, but overall I thought it was really well realised. I enjoyed all of the different lore that's been created, and I am eagerly anticipating reading the rest of the series. Although I do believe that it's one of those series where there's crossover with the other books that the author's written, so I need to catch up on the other series before I read book 2 in this series, but it's not out yet anyway. And we're down to our last 2 books, which is really exciting. So we've got Through Her Eyes by Sophie Fahy. I hated this. I thought it was an interesting concept, very poorly executed, and then the ending made me want to throw this book across the room. And honestly, the ending's very much in fitting with the rest of the book, in that a better writer with more skill could have executed that really well, but because this author didn't have the skill to pull it off properly, it ended up being frustrating and felt kind of cheap and worthless. So not a good time, not a good time. All of my books just fell over. And the final book that I finished in the month of October was Palestine by Jo Sacco. This is my husband B's copy, and it sits on my shelves because I have a library and, you know, why not put it on my shelves? I've been meaning to read this for a while, but it just felt appropriate to pick it up right now and get a bit more historical context. I do think it was a little bit choppy story-wise, but also it showed me a lot of things that historically, this is set during the first Intifada, so in the early 90s, but it showed me a lot of things that historically had happened in Palestine, and I was really confused about the ending because it felt like it just like I was missing pages. But then when I sat with it for a moment, I was like, oh, okay, I get why it's done that. So overall pretty good, and actually a lot less kind of biased than I expected. I don't know how to properly explain it, but you didn't get the sense that Joe went into these circumstances feeling like he was already pro-Palestine. He visited Palestine and saw the reality of the situation and was just telling the stories as he was told them. And then you also saw Joe interacting with some Israelis and got their point of view, and the contrast was really interesting as well. Just overall a good kind of entry point for people that want to have a little bit more historical background about Palestine. So that is all of the books that I completed in the month of October, and I've managed to keep this quite short and snappy. As I said at the start of the video, if you want any more information about any of the books that I've talked about, let me know in the comments, because I know this has been really quick. And until next time, love you. Bye!